Greetings, weary travelers. Welcome to the Tavern Tall Tales. Come, warm your bones by the fire and wet your throats with a hearty ale. Please be so kind to like and subscribe. You've wandered far, I can see it in your eyes. Sit close, for these old walls have heard tales of glory, peril, and treasures untold. Tonight, you'll hear one or two from a grizzled soul who's seen more than his share of the wide, wild world. The fire at the windmill is a tale whispered across generations, and tonight, my friends, you shall hear it from me. Pull up a chair, warm your hands by the hearth, and let the smoke of this tavern mingle with the echoes of history. Once, on a lonely hill overlooking a bustling village, stood a grand windmill, its sails turning tirelessly under sun and moon. It was more than a mill. It was the village's heart, grinding their grain and guarding their livelihoods. But one fateful night, under a sky strewn with stars, the windmill caught fire, and so began the unraveling of a sinister tale. Old Mr. Larkin, the miller, had locked up for the night, his lantern swinging gently as he made his way to his cottage. The air was still, the kind of stillness that pricks the back of your neck, foretelling disaster. When the fire began, it was a small, flickering thing, easily mistaken for the glow of a wayward lantern. But soon, it roared into a monstrous inferno, its flames reaching hungrily for the heavens. The village bell clanged wildly, summoning the villagers from their beds. They formed lines to pass water from the river, their faces streaked with soot and fear. Brave young Evan, barely more than a boy, plunged into the burning mill time and again to save the precious grain stored within. When the windmill's sails groaned and toppled with a crash that echoed for miles, it seemed all hope was lost. But the grain was saved, and the villagers, though shaken, resolved to rebuild. Yet, even amidst the ash, questions lingered. What had caused the fire? Could it truly have been an accident? The very next morning, a rider appeared on the horizon, his armor gleaming in the sun. Sir Leon, the king's investigator, had arrived. He was a man of sharp eyes and sharp wit, known far and wide for uncovering truths others wished to keep hidden. Sir Leon wasted no time. He combed the ruins of the windmill and questioned every villager who had seen the flames. His first discovery was a broken flask near the windmill's base, its faint smell of oil betraying its purpose. This was no accident. The fire had been set deliberately. The villagers were shocked. Who among them could do such a thing? Suspicion quickly fell upon Roderick, a bitter man who had long resented Mr. Larkin. Years ago, Roderick had vied for the position of miller, only to be rejected by the council. Since then, he had nursed his grievances, his bitterness festering like an open wound. Sir Leon searched Roderick's home and found damning evidence, a barrel of oil and boots that matched the footprints near the mill. Roderick protested, of course, but young Evan stepped forward. He had seen a cloaked figure near the mill that night, limping, just as Roderick did. Cornered, Roderick confessed, claiming he had acted out of spite. The villagers were ready to close the chapter and move on, but Sir Leon was not satisfied. Something about Roderick's confession seemed too simple. Why would a man like Roderick, impulsive and clumsy, set a fire so precise it brought the entire structure down? The investigator's instincts told him there was more to the story. His suspicions deepened when he examined the oil flask again. It bore the crest of a merchant guild from Thaldris, a city far beyond Roderick's reach. Sir Leon's inquiries revealed whispers of a stranger who had passed through the village days before the fire. This man, with his fine clothes and a serpent-shaped clasp on his cloak, had asked peculiar questions about the windmill and its stores. Following this lead, Sir Leon traced the stranger to a nearby town. The man was Calder, a wandering alchemist and mercenary known for solving problems with fire and shadow. Calder was no ordinary arsonist. He was a man hired to do the bidding of those too powerful to dirty their own hands. Sir Leon dug deeper, and a chilling truth began to emerge. The windmill fire was no mere act of spite, but part of a larger scheme orchestrated by none other than Baron Eric of Stonehaven. The Baron coveted the hill on which the windmill stood, envisioning it as the site of a trade depot to expand his wealth and influence. When the villagers refused to sell, he decided to force their hand. Through Calder, Baron Eric ensured the windmill's destruction, using Roderick as an unwitting scapegoat. It was a plan so cruel and cunning it might have succeeded, if not for Sir Leon. The investigators' confrontation with Calder was swift and decisive. Posing as a traveler, Sir Leon spread word that the villagers were considering selling the land. Calder, lured by the prospect of concluding his business, reappeared to meet with a messenger from Stonehaven. Sir Leon and his men ambushed them, extracting confessions that laid bare the Baron's treachery. Baron Eric, once a towering figure of wealth and power, found himself dragged before the king's court. His lands were seized, his reputation destroyed. Calder's fate was no kinder, for even a serpent's cunning is no match for the blade of justice. As for the village, they rebuilt their windmill, stronger and taller than before. The tale of its fiery destruction became a story not of despair, but of resilience and unity. And Sir Leon? He rode away, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. A man who had once again proven that truth and justice could prevail, even against the most devious of schemes. So, my friends, when you next see a windmill standing proud against the sky, remember the fire that tried to bring one down, and the people who rose to meet the challenge. The Mystery of the Silent Bell. In the quiet town of Braylock, nestled in the shadow of the Mistfall Mountains, there stood a bell tower, famed across the kingdom for its magnificent chime. Crafted centuries ago, the bell was said to ring on its own during moments of great peril, warning the townsfolk of impending danger. But for the past month, it had remained silent, even as livestock vanished, homes were raided, and whispers of shadowy figures prowling the streets at night began to spread. Desperate and afraid, the townsfolk sought the help of Sir Leon, renowned not only for his swordsmanship, but for his unerring ability to unravel mysteries that left others baffled. He arrived on a crisp autumn morning, his cloak dusted with the golden leaves of the season, and his keen gray eyes scanning the anxious faces of the townsfolk who gathered to greet him. After listening intently to their tales, Sir Leon climbed the creaking stairs of the bell tower. At the top, he found the great bronze bell, its surface tarnished but still imposing. He ran his fingers over the intricate carvings etched into its surface, runes of protection and warning. But something was amiss. The runes, he realized, had been partially scratched away. That was no accident, he murmured. From the tower, Sir Leon observed the town below. The streets were orderly, the homes sturdy, yet he noted subtle signs of unease. Windows shuttered even during the day, and children playing close to their parents. But what caught his eye was the woods bordering the town, where a thin wisp of smoke curled into the air. As twilight fell, Sir Leon ventured into the woods, his sword resting lightly in his hand. Harsh whispers reached his ears, and through the trees, he saw a group of cloaked figures gathered around a fire. At their feet lay a stolen bell clapper, the very heart of Braylock's warning system. The group was chanting in a guttural language, their words twisting the air into an oppressive weight. With the precision of a hunter, Sir Leon stepped into the clearing. "I trust you'll find it hard to continue your ritual without that." He held up a small vial, filled with powdered bronze. The figures froze. "You have defiled the bell and terrorized this town," Sir Leon said, his voice calm but cutting. "For what purpose?" The leader stepped forward, his face hidden in shadow. "The bell is a relic of power, Knight. We sought to silence it and claim its magic for our own. And now, so shall we claim you." They surged toward him, but Sir Leon was ready. With a sweep of his blade and a commanding cry, he disrupted their formation, scattering the cloaked figures like leaves. A clash of steel followed, but none could match the night investigator's skill. When the dust settled, the group was bound and silenced. Sir Leon retrieved the clapper, his gaze lingering on the subdued figures. "Your folly ends here," he said, his voice firm. The next morning, the bell was restored, and as Sir Leon prepared to leave, the townsfolk rang it in gratitude. Its chime echoed through the valley, a sound of hope and resilience. As Sir Leon mounted his horse, a child ran up to him, offering a small carved figurine of the bell. He accepted it with a rare smile. "May it never fall silent again," he said, before riding into the horizon, ever ready for the next mystery. The capture of Alder, the Black Snake. In the bustling city of Greyhaven, whispers of Alder, the Black Snake, had grown into an ominous roar. A master thief and shadowy figure in the criminal underworld, Alder was infamous for his cunning, leaving no trail and mocking the city guard at every turn. For years, he had slipped through their fingers until the Crown called upon Sir Leon, the night investigator, to put an end to the reign of the Black Snake. Sir Leon arrived in Greyhaven on a rainy evening, his steely eyes studying the bustling streets cloaked in mist. He had dealt with criminals before, but Alder was no common thief. The man was as much a legend as a menace, known for his unparalleled skill in evasion and a mind sharp as any blade. Where would you hide, Alder, if you believed yourself untouchable? Sir Leon mused as he walked through the marketplace. The city buzzed with activity, yet an undercurrent of unease lingered. Merchants spoke in hushed tones, and even the beggars avoided eye contact. Leon began his investigation by studying Alder's past heists. The Black Snake had stolen from nobles, merchants, and even the city treasury itself, but Leon noticed a pattern. The thefts weren't random. Each target had, at some point, wronged the city's poor or vulnerable. Alder wasn't just a thief. He was a vigilante of sorts, the one who cared little for the law. Late one night, Leon followed the thread of his deductions to the docks. The labyrinthine warehouses that were perfect for someone like Alder, a place where shadows ruled and secrets thrived. Quietly, Leon infiltrated the area, his footsteps muffled by the rain-slicked cobblestones. As he approached a dimly lit warehouse, he heard the faint murmur of voices. Inside, a group of smugglers was loading crates onto a ship. Among them stood a figure clad in black, his face obscured but his movements precise. It was Alder. Leon stepped forward, his voice carrying authority even in a whisper. Alder, the Black Snake. Your games in tonight, the smugglers froze, their hands drifting to weapons, but Alder only chuckled, a low, serpentine sound. Sir Leon, the Crown's hound. I was wondering when they'd send you. Alder signaled his men, and chaos erupted. The smugglers charged, but Leon was ready. His blade moved like lightning, each strike calculated to disarm rather than kill. He ducked and weaved through the fray, his focus never leaving Alder, who watched with an almost amused expression. When the last smuggler fell, groaning but alive, Alder stepped forward, drawing twin daggers that gleamed like fangs. Impressive, knight, but you'll find I'm not so easily subdued. Their duel was a dance of skill and strategy, Alder's agility matched by Leon's precision. The Black Snake was fast, striking with the speed of a viper, but Leon's calm and steady defense wore him down. Finally, with a calculated feint, Leon disarmed Alder, sending his dagger skittering across the floor. You fight well, Alder admitted, breathing heavily. But tell me, knight, have you considered why I do what I do? Do you think those eyes steal from our innocent? Leon held his sword steady, his gaze unwavering. The law exists for justice, Alder. If you've been wronged, there are paths to right those wrongs that don't involve plunging the city into chaos. Alder laughed bitterly. Justice? The law serves those who pay it. You of all people should know that. Leon hesitated, the weight of Alder's words hanging in the air. But his duty was clear. You will have your chance to speak. But first, you will answer for your crimes. Bound and defeated, Alder was handed over to the city guard. Yet even as they led him away, he turned to Leon and said, You've caught me, knight. But ask yourself this. Are you serving justice, or just the powerful? The words stayed with Leon as he watched Alder disappear into the city's prison. The night investigator had won the battle, but the questions Alder raised lingered like shadows in the corners of Greyhaven. The alliance of the knight and the swordsman. In the sprawling city of Marvale, chaos reigned. A mysterious illness had swept through the population, leaving entire districts abandoned. Whispers spoke of a sinister figure behind the plague. A rogue alchemist named Vordard who sought to bring the city to its knees. The Crown sent for Sir Leon, but the scope of the threat demanded a different approach. The night investigator needed an ally, someone with unmatched skill and an unerring sense of justice. Thus, the call went out to Kenji, the blind swordsman, and his loyal dog, Haru. The two met in the shadow of Marvale's towering gates as twilight bathed the city in hues of orange and gold. Sir Leon, in his gleaming armor, was every bit the picture of a noble knight, while Kenji, clad in simple but well-worn garments, exuded an air of quiet power. Haru, the faithful Akita, stood between them, his keen eyes watching Leon intently. Kenji, Leon began, offering a respectful nod. Marvale needs more than a sword. It needs someone who can sense the unseen, someone unafraid to face shadows. And you believe I am that man? Kenji replied, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. I believe together we can accomplish what neither of us could alone. Kenji inclined his head slightly, a faint smile gracing his lips. Then let us begin. The investigation led the unlikely trio deep into Marvell's heart, where the air was thick with the stench of sickness. Haru guided Kenji through the winding streets, his paws padding softly on cobblestones slick with dew. Sir Leon's sharp eyes scanned for signs of danger as they pieced together the alchemist's trail. It was Haru who found the first clue, a discarded vial with traces of a dark, viscous liquid. Kenji knelt beside it, his fingers brushing the cobblestones. "The air here feels heavier," he murmured. "Whatever was in this vial, it lingers." Leon sniffed the air and frowned. "A potent poison." Vordred's work. They followed the trail to an abandoned apothecary where shelves of dust-covered jars lined the walls. In the center of the room was a trapdoor. Without hesitation, Haru sniffed the edges and growled low, his hackles rising. "Trouble below," Kenji said, gripping the hilt of his blade. Leon nodded and descended first, his sword drawn. The underground chamber was a labyrinth of tunnels, lit by flickering torches. The air was thick with the acrid scent of chemicals. At its center stood Vordred, a gaunt figure cloaked in dark robes, surrounded by bubbling cauldrons and sinister apparatus. "You're too late," Vordred sneered. "The plague will spread beyond Marvell. The age of kings and knights is over." "You won't live to see it," Leon replied, stepping forward with his blade raised. Vordred unleashed a wave of traps. Hidden crossbows, collapsing walls, and alchemical bombs. But the trio moved as one. Haru darted ahead, sniffing out danger and barking warnings. Kenji's blade was a blur, cutting through traps with precision, his movements guided by Haru's signals. Leon shielded them from flying debris, his armor absorbing the brunt of the explosions. As they closed in, Vordred drew a jagged dagger laced with poison and lunged at Leon. But Haru's bark alerted Kenji, who turned with lightning speed and disarmed the alchemist in a single fluid motion. Vordred stumbled back, only to find Leon's sword at his throat. "Your reign of terror ends now," Leon said. Kenji sheathed his blade and added, "You sought to blind this city with fear. Instead, it sees you for what you are. A coward, bound and defeated, Vordred was delivered to the city guard. The cure for the plague was found among his notes, and the city began its slow recovery. As the sun rose over Marvell, Sir Leon, Kenji, and Haru stood atop the city's walls, gazing at the bustling streets below. "You fight well, Kenji," Leon said, his tone warm with admiration. "Your instincts and skill are unparalleled, and you, Sir Leon," Kenji replied, "are a man of honor and intellect. Few could have pieced together Vordred's plot as swiftly as you did," Haru barked, wagging his tail, as if to say, "We make a good team." Leon smiled, reaching down to scratch behind Haru's ears. "Indeed we do. Perhaps our paths will cross again." With that, they parted ways, Kenji and Haru heading toward the horizon, and Sir Leon turning back to his duty. Yet the alliance of the knight and the swordsman would be remembered in Marvell's history as the day the city was saved by courage, wisdom, and an unbreakable bond of trust. The Whispering Stones. The winds howled over the jagged cliffs of Gloomhaven, carrying with them a cacophony of whispers. The villagers called it the Curse of the Whispering Stones, and none dared tread near the ancient ruins perched atop the cliffs. They said the stones sang a song of despair that could drive a man mad. Travelers spoke of hearing their names called, of secrets that weren't theirs murmured in their ears. Most who wandered too close were never seen again. It was here that Sir Leon found himself one fateful evening, his silver armor glinting faintly in the light of the waning moon. The knight had been summoned by a desperate missive from the village elder, begging him to investigate the mysterious disappearances of travelers who strayed too near the ruins. "Beware the stones, Sir Leon," the elder had warned, his voice trembling. "They call out to those who wander alone." Luring them to their doom, Sir Leon was not easily deterred. Renowned as a night investigator, he had solved mysteries that left others confounded. With his trusty steed, Argent, and his sharp mind as his weapons, he approached the cliffside ruins. The air grew heavy with an unnatural chill, and the whispers began. Faint at first, they grew louder and more insistent as he drew nearer. "Leon," they hissed, each syllable a seductive pull at his thoughts. "Come closer. Learn the truth." Dismounting, Sir Leon rested a hand on the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. Steel, he knew, would be of little use against whatever malevolent force lay within the stones. Instead, he let his logical mind guide him, observing the strange patterns carved into the monoliths and the peculiar arrangement of the ruins. Moss and ivy clung to the ancient stones, but the carvings beneath were sharp and deliberate. Symbols, he noted, that told a fragmented story. As he examined the stones, he noticed that the whispers were not random. They formed a melody, a haunting lullaby that resonated deep within his chest. He closed his eyes and listened, piecing together the fragments. It spoke of betrayal, of love turned to ash, and of a curse bound by blood. The villagers had spoken of the ruins as a place of worship in ancient times, but Sir Leon began to suspect it was something more sinister. At the center of the ruins, he found a weathered stone altar. Upon it lay a locket, its chain rusted but its gem gleaming as if freshly polished. The whispers intensified as he reached for it, the voices overlapping in a desperate plea. "Free us." Sir Leon's fingers hesitated over the locket. He knew enough of curses to tread carefully. Drawing a leather cloth from his pack, he lifted the locket without making direct contact. The whispers turned into a keening wail, and for a moment, the air around him seemed to shimmer as if the world itself recoiled. Opening the locket revealed a miniature portrait of a woman with sorrowful eyes. Beneath it, an inscription read, "To my dearest Elira, may our love outlast eternity." The knight's brow furrowed. This was no ordinary curse. It was the anguish of souls bound by a lover's vengeance. "Who are you, Elira?" Sir Leon muttered under his breath. "And what binds you to this place?" The whispers offered no answer. Instead, they drew him toward a collapsed archway on the far side of the ruins. There, half buried under rubble, he uncovered the entrance to an underground chamber. The descent was treacherous, the steps worn smooth by time and slick with moisture. As he descended, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. At the bottom, the chamber opened into a vaulted crypt. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with stone alcoves. In the center of the room lay an ornate coffin, its lid ajar. Beside it, another locket gleamed faintly in the dim light. The remains of a woman, her bones wrapped in faded, tattered silk, lay undisturbed. The whispers fell silent. Sir Leon placed the two lockets together, their gems aligning perfectly. A brilliant light erupted from the stones, and the knight shielded his eyes. When he looked again, the chamber was bathed in an ethereal glow. The spirit of the woman Illyra stood before him, her form translucent but radiant. "You have freed me," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "But the curse is deeper than you know." She told him of a jealous lover who had bound her soul to the stones, ensuring that her spirit would forever be tormented. But in his rage, he had miscast the spell, trapping countless others as well. The ruins had become a prison for wandering souls, and the curse would only be lifted when her remains and the lockets were buried together, far from this place. Sir Leon carried her remains and the lockets to a grove at the edge of the village, where the ground was soft and the air was sweet with the scent of blooming wildflowers. He buried them beneath an ancient oak, and as he did, he felt a weight lift from the air. The whispers ceased, replaced by a gentle breeze that carried with it the faintest sound of laughter. When he returned to Gloomhaven, the villagers were waiting, their faces alight with hope. The curse, it seemed, had been lifted. But Sir Leon, ever the thinker, could not help but wonder, was the curse truly gone? Or had he merely shifted its burden elsewhere? As he rode away from Gloomhaven, the faintest whisper trailed on the wind, carrying with it a final word. "Thank you." The Haunted Chapel. The autumn sun was setting over the Vale of Corvallis, painting the horizon in shades of crimson and gold. Sir Leon rode steadily along the ancient road that wound through the valley, his silver armor catching the last rays of daylight. Argent, his faithful steed, trotted dutifully, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp evening air. The knight was weary from days of travel, yet his destination, a remote chapel shrouded in superstition, spurred him forward. It had been the plea of a humble monk, Brother Callan, that had brought Sir Leon to this forsaken corner of the kingdom. The monk had arrived in the capital with tales of a spectral menace plaguing the chapel of St. Theobald, an ancient sanctuary built long before the kingdom's founding. Worshippers had fled, the priest had disappeared, and villagers spoke of ghostly wails that echoed through the woods at night. "The chapel is cursed, Sir Leon," Brother Callan had said, clutching a worn rosary in trembling hands. "The dead do not rest, and their torment spills into our world. We need a man of faith and courage to uncover the truth." And so Sir Leon's journey began. As the sun dipped below the hills, the knight arrived at the edge of the forest that surrounded the chapel. The path ahead was overgrown, and the dense canopy above blocked what little light remained. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to lean inward as if conspiring against any who dared enter. "Stay close, Argent," Sir Leon said softly, patting the horse's neck. Together, they ventured into the shadowy woods. By the time they reached the chapel, night had fully claimed the sky. The structure loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the darkness. Time had not been kind to the old sanctuary. Its stone walls were cracked, and ivy clung to its facade like veins on a weathered hand. The great wooden doors, once carved with intricate scenes of saints and angels, were now marred with deep scratches that spoke of desperate violence. Sir Leon dismounted and tied Argent to a sturdy post. As he approached the doors, a chill wind swept past, carrying with it a faint, mournful wail. The sound was neither beast nor bird, but something altogether unnatural. Pushing the doors open, Sir Leon stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and decayed wood. Moonlight filtered through shattered stained glass windows, casting fragmented colors onto the cold floor. Rows of pews stood in silent disarray, and the altar at the far end was draped in tattered cloth. Yet it was the silence that unnerved him most, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow even the creak of his boots on the stone floor. He began his investigation, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the chapel. Symbols etched into the walls caught his attention. Not the sacred iconography of the church, but runes of an older, darker origin. They told a story of binding and sacrifice, of a pact made in blood. Sir Leon's jaw tightened. Whatever haunted this place, it was no ordinary spirit. A sudden noise broke the stillness. The sound of footsteps echoed from the nave, deliberate and heavy. Drawing his sword, Sir Leon turned toward the source. From the shadows emerged a figure, its form barely human. Shrouded in tattered robes, its face obscured, the being radiated a malevolent energy that seemed to distort the air around it. "Who disturbs my sanctuary?" The figure hissed, its voice a chorus of anguish. "I am Sir Leon of the Silver Order," the knight declared. "I seek to end your torment and restore peace to this place." The figure laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Peace? There can be no peace. The pact was broken, and now all who enter shall share my fate." Before Sir Leon could respond, the spirit lunged. Its form moved with unnatural speed, a blur of shadow and malice. The knight raised his shield just in time, the force of the attack reverberating through his arm. He countered with a swift slash of his sword, but the blade passed through the apparition, meeting only air. "Your steel cannot harm me," the spirit sneered. "But you are welcome to try." Sir Leon retreated, his mind racing. He knew he could not best this foe through sheer force. Instead, he focused on the runes, recalling their meaning. They were marks of binding, designed to tether the spirit to the mortal plane. To banish it, he would need to sever the ties that held it here. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The spirit hesitated, its form flickering. "I was once Father Aldrich, keeper of this chapel. I sought to protect my flock, but in my desperation, I made a bargain with powers beyond my understanding. When I failed to uphold my end, they cursed me to this wretched existence and the runes." Sir Leon pressed. "Who inscribed them?" "I did," the spirit admitted, "to bind the darkness here, so it could not escape. But it was futile. The curse has grown stronger with each passing year." Sir Leon nodded. The spirit's remorse was evident, and in it, he saw a glimmer of hope. "Then we must destroy the runes and lay your spirit to rest. Will you guide me?" For a moment, the spirit was silent. Then it extended a spectral hand. "If you are truly willing, follow me." Together, they moved through the chapel, the spirit revealing hidden symbols etched into the walls, floor, and altar. Sir Leon worked methodically, using consecrated oil and holy verses to erase the runes. Each mark destroyed weakened the spirit's form, yet Father Aldrich seemed at peace. The final rune lay beneath the altar, carved deep into the stone. As Sir Leon destroyed it, a blinding light filled the chapel. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a warmth that felt like the sun breaking through storm clouds. When the light faded, the spirit was gone. In its place lay a simple rosary, its beads glinting softly in the moonlight. Sir Leon knelt and offered a silent prayer before taking the rosary. As he stepped outside, the forest seemed less foreboding, the air fresher. The curse was broken, and the chapel of St. Theobald could once again be a place of peace. As Argent whinnied softly, Sir Leon mounted and began his journey back to the village. The stars above seemed brighter, and a gentle breeze carried with it the faintest whisper of gratitude. "Thank you." Sir Leon's sense of accomplishment was short-lived. As he reached the edge of the forest, he noticed a change in the air. The gentle breeze turned into an unsettling stillness, and the stars seemed to dim. From behind him came a voice, cold and mocking. "You have freed me, knight, and for that I am grateful." Sir Leon turned sharply, his hand instinctively going to his sword. Standing in the shadows of the forest was not Father Aldrich, but a new figure. Tall, wreathed in darkness, and exuding an aura of malevolence that made the knight's blood run cold. "Who are you?" Sir Leon demanded. The figure stepped forward, its face obscured, but its presence overwhelming. "I am the one Aldrich sought to bind. The fool thought he could imprison me with his pitiful runes, but you have undone his work. My prison is shattered, and now this world shall know my wrath." Realization struck Sir Leon like a blow. In his effort to free the spirit of Father Aldrich, he had unwittingly released something far more dangerous. Gritting his teeth, he raised his sword. "If I have made a mistake, I will correct it. You shall not wreak havoc while I draw breath." The figure laughed, a sound that echoed through the forest like thunder. "Brave words, knight. Let us see if your courage matches your strength." And so, Sir Leon prepared for a battle unlike any he had faced, knowing that the fate of the Vale of Corvallis, perhaps even the kingdom itself, hung in the balance. Ah, the Red Ruckus, a ship whose name strikes fear and awe into sailors and storytellers alike. Gather round, and I'll spin the tale of its bold crew, infamous for their escapades on the high seas. The Red Ruckus wasn't just a ship. It was a floating fortress of chaos and cunning, painted crimson to hide the blood of battle. Or so they claimed. It sailed under the command of Captain Amelia Ironheart Vane, once a promising naval officer. She turned rogue after uncovering corruption in her fleet. Her betrayal of the crown became the stuff of legends, and her heart of iron earned her the loyalty of a most unusual crew. First, there was Garrett Ghost Hands, the quartermaster. His deft fingers were as quick with a sword as they were with a lockpick. Garrett was said to be a man who could steal the wind from a storm if it suited him. Then came Anka, the cannoneer, a towering woman with muscles carved by 1,000 battles. Anka spoke little, but let her cannons do the talking. Her custom-built swivel gun, affectionately named Thunder's Kiss, was her pride and joy. Navigating the ship was Elias Starseeker Kane, a former astronomer turned pirate. His maps were said to chart not just the seas but the skies themselves, guiding the Red Ruckus to treasures hidden by time and tide. No crew would be complete without a surgeon, and the Red Ruckus had none other than Doc Rhine, a man rumored to have once served aboard a ghost ship. Doc's remedies were as effective as they were mysterious, often involving powders and potions from far-off lands. Finally, there was Sable, the mysterious lookout who claimed to have been raised by merfolk. Sable's sea-green eyes seemed to pierce the waves, and she had a knack for spotting danger before it appeared. The greatest tale of the Red Ruckus unfolded in the perilous shattered reefs, where an ancient treasure was said to lie buried beneath the sea. The crew's target was no ordinary treasure. It was the lost sapphire crown of Althoria, a relic said to grant its bearer dominion over the oceans. Navigating the reefs required every ounce of Starseeker's skill, as jagged rocks and swirling maelstroms threatened to tear the ship apart. Once anchored, the crew faced another challenge: a cursed island guarded by the revenant corsairs, ghostly sailors bound to protect the crown. Captain Ironheart led her crew ashore, sword gleaming in the moonlight. The battle was fierce, with ghost hands locking blades with spectral foes and Anka's thunder's kiss roaring into the night. But the revenants could not be defeated by steel alone. Sable, with her knowledge of the arcane, uncovered a riddle etched into the ruins of an ancient temple. It spoke of an offering to the sea, a sacrifice of one's greatest desire. To everyone's shock, Captain Ironheart stepped forward and cast her cherished naval insignia into the waves. The sacrifice freed the crown from its curse, and the revenants dissipated into mist. As the crew sailed away, the sapphire crown safely aboard, a storm erupted around the Red Ruckus. Legend has it, the sea itself raged at their defiance, but Starseeker's celestial charts guided them to safety. The sapphire crown was never seen again, and Captain Ironheart refused to say where she hid it. Some believe it lies in the hold of the Red Ruckus, others that it was buried on a distant shore. Whatever the truth, the ship and its crew remain symbols of adventure, freedom, and defiance against all odds. And so, the Red Ruckus sails on in whispers and legends, its scarlet sails blazing against the horizon. A beacon for those daring enough to dream of the high seas. The Crimson Mirage. Let me tell you a fresh tale, one of cunning, danger, and the unyielding will of Captain Amelia Ironheart Vane and her crew. The story begins in the port of Herauden, a place where ships come to trade, sailors come to drink, and whispers of treasure flow like spilled rum. It was there that Captain Ironheart overheard an intriguing rumor: the Crimson Mirage, an elusive ghost ship said to hold the fabled heart of Aegir, an ancient gemstone rumored to grant control over storms. The Mirage was more myth than reality, its sightings scattered across oceans and centuries. But Captain Ironheart was not one to shy from the impossible. Gathering her crew aboard the Red Ruckus, she laid out the plan. They would track the ghost ship by piecing together fragments of maritime lore and following the patterns of storms that seemed unnaturally fierce. For weeks, the Red Ruckus pursued the Mirage through treacherous waters. Guided by Elias Starseeker, Kane's charts and Sable's uncanny sense of the sea, the crew faced peril after peril. Howling tempests, monstrous waves, and rival pirates eager to sink the infamous Red Ruckus. At last, they found themselves in the Sea of Whispers, a stretch of water said to drive sailors mad with its eerie silence. The air was heavy, the sky darkened, and there, through the mist, they saw it, the Crimson Mirage. Its sails were torn, yet it moved as if alive, glowing faintly with an otherworldly red light. Captain Ironheart gave the order, and the crew readied themselves. Garrett Ghost Hands was the first to leap aboard, his twin daggers gleaming. The Mirage's deck was cold and slick, as though it had risen from the depths of the sea. No living crew greeted them. Only shades, translucent figures wielding rusted cutlasses. These phantoms fought without relent, their blades slicing through the air with an unnatural chill. Enka the cannoneer blasted them apart with thunder's kiss, though they ray-formed as quickly as mist in the morning sun. Sable's sea-green eyes scanned the deck until they locked onto the ship's wheel, where a crimson glow pulsed like a heartbeat. "The heart of Aegir," she whispered, pointing it out to Captain Ironheart. As the crew fought off the shades, Captain Ironheart and Sable pushed toward the wheel. It was there they encountered the Mirage's captain, a spectral figure cloaked in tattered crimson, his eyes burning with fury. "Who dares steal what is mine?" The ghostly captain roared, his voice echoing like thunder. Captain Ironheart stood her ground, her sword gleaming with defiance. "Your time is over, old ghost. The seas belong to the living." Their duel was fierce, the clang of steel ringing out as the spectral captain's blade shimmered with red light. But Ironheart was no ordinary pirate. She fought with skill and determination that no phantom could match. With a final, precise strike, she shattered the ghost's blade. Sable reached the wheel, her hands closing around the heart of Aegir. The moment she lifted it, the shades vanished, and the Mirage began to dissolve into mist. The Red Ruckus crew scrambled back to their ship just as the ghostly vessel faded completely. With the heart of Aegir aboard, the Red Ruckus found itself pursued by ferocious storms. As though the sea itself sought to reclaim the gemstone, Elias Starseeker, Cain charted a course through the chaos, while Enka's cannons roared to deter rival ships that thought to take advantage of their plight. Finally, Captain Ironheart made a fateful decision. She climbed to the ship's bow, the heart of Aegir in hand, and hurled it into the churning sea. The storm ceased at once, and a calm, eerie silence fell over the waters. Though they had not kept the treasure, the crew knew they had bested the Crimson Mirage and lived to tell the tale. The legend of the Red Ruckus grew even greater, and Captain Ironheart's name became synonymous with both daring and wisdom. And so the Red Ruckus sailed on, its crimson sails a beacon of adventure, its crew ever ready for the next impossible quest. The Enigma of the Abyssal Bell. Let me take you to the farthest reaches of the known seas, where adventure brews and legends are born. It all began in the sprawling market of Cordwain Port, where Captain Amelia Ironheart Vane overheard whispers of an artifact known as the Abyssal Bell. This ancient relic, forged by sea gods, or so the stories went, was said to grant its wielder the power to summon or calm the Leviathan, the mythical guardian of the abyss. Ironheart's interest was piqued. A relic like the Abyssal Bell could tip the balance of power in any sea. But the tale came with a warning. The bell was locked away in the Vault of Tides, a submerged temple guarded by ancient traps, shifting currents, and creatures of the deep. "We've faced worse," Ironheart said, rallying her crew. "Prepare the ship. The Red Ruckus sails at dawn." The crew set course for the Vault of Tides, guided by a fragment of a map purchased from a dubious cartographer. As the ship approached the uncharted waters of the Siren's Vale, the journey became perilous. Elias Starseeker, Cain worked tirelessly deciphering celestial patterns to navigate the treacherous, fog-laden seas. Sable, perched high in the crow's nest, called out warnings of jagged rocks and shadowy movements beneath the waves. One night, as the crew gathered for supper, a haunting melody drifted across the water. It was the call of sirens. Their song enchanted the crew, drawing them to the ship's edge. It was Sable who saved them, her voice cutting through the trance as she fired a flare into the sky. The sirens vanished beneath the waves, but not before leaving deep scratches along the red ruckus hull. After days of relentless sailing, the crew arrived at the coordinates. There, the sea was unnaturally calm, and the water shimmered like liquid glass. As the red ruckus anchored, the outline of a massive underwater structure became visible. A temple carved from coral and stone. Garrett, Ghost Hands, ever the opportunist, led the dive to the temple alongside Anka, the cannoneer, and Captain Ironheart. They descended into the depths, their path illuminated by glowing plankton and bioluminescent fish. The vault was as treacherous as the legends warned. Traps sprang to life with every step. A sudden surge of water here, razor-sharp coral there. Ghost Hands' nimble movements and uncanny instincts saved the team more than once, while Anka's sheer strength broke through a collapsing doorway. At last, they reached the central chamber. Suspended above a swirling vortex of water was the Abyssal Bell, a massive artifact made of shimmering black metal that seemed to hum with energy. As soon as Ironheart touched the bell, the water trembled. From the vortex below, a monstrous eye opened, followed by the emergence of the Leviathan itself. The creature was immense, its body covered in glowing scales and tendrils that crackled with electric energy. The Leviathan surged toward the crew, its roar shaking the temple. Thinking quickly, Ironheart rang the Abyssal Bell, its sound resonating through the water like a haunting melody. The Leviathan paused, its glowing eyes locked onto her. The bell granted its bearer control, but only for a moment. Ironheart realized the truth. The Leviathan was bound to protect the bell, not obey its wielder. Back to the ship, she shouted. The crew barely escaped the temple as it crumbled, the Leviathan in pursuit. Breaking the surface, they climbed aboard the red ruckus, shouting orders to set sail. Anka fired Thunder's Kiss, her cannonball creating a diversion as the ship sped away. The Leviathan gave chase, its massive form creating waves that nearly capsized the ship. Starseeker charted a course toward a narrow strait, a place where the Leviathan's size would hinder its movements. As the red ruckus sailed into the strait, Ironheart made a fateful decision. Standing at the stern, she rang the Abyssal Bell one last time, its sound echoing across the water. The Leviathan froze, its massive body shuddering. Taking the bell, Ironheart threw it into the abyss. The Leviathan let out a mournful cry before sinking back into the depths, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The crew sailed into the sunrise, battered but victorious. They had escaped the Leviathan and ensured that the Abyssal Bell and its terrible power would remain hidden. Captain Ironheart stood at the helm, a faint smile on her lips. Another legend for the books, she said. And so the red ruckus sailed on, its crimson sails bright against the dawn, carrying its daring crew toward their next great adventure. The new Red Ruckus Gang. In the bustling market town of Brefford, nestled at the crossroads of trade routes, peace was usually the norm. But one autumn, chaos descended upon the town under the guise of a notorious outlaw gang, the Red Ruckus. The Red Ruckus wasn't just a name. It was a reputation built on fear and flair. Known for their crimson cloaks and daring raids, the gang left their mark on every village they struck. Their leader, a cunning woman named Marla Amberley, was as charismatic as she was ruthless. Her fiery hair and sharp tongue earned her the nickname, the Scarlet Flame, and she thrived on outsmarting lawmen and lords alike. One crisp morning, the townsfolk of Brefford awoke to find their market square painted in chaos. Stalls were overturned, goods stolen, and the statue of the town's founder draped in a crimson cloak. A bold calling card of the Red Ruckus. But oddly, no one had seen or heard them. They were like ghosts in the night. The town grieved. A stout and nervous man named Osric was desperate. Brefford was hosting the annual harvest fair in a week, a critical event for trade and reputation. If the Red Ruckus struck again during the fair, it could ruin the town's economy. He called for help, sending word to the surrounding lands for anyone brave enough to take on the gang. Enter Garrick, Grin Davin, a traveling tinkerer with a sharp wit and an even sharper mind, despite his easy smile and humble appearance. Garrick was a former spy for the king, retired after a betrayal left him weary of courtly intrigues. He arrived in Brefford with a cart of odd tools and a curious dog named Patch, whose mismatched eyes gave him a peculiar charm. Garrick volunteered to catch the Red Ruckus, though the townsfolk were skeptical. What could a tinkerer do against a band of seasoned outlaws? But Garrick only grinned, saying, "Sometimes you don't need a sword to cut through trouble. You just need the right angle." He spent the next few days observing the town, chatting with merchants, and fiddling with gadgets in his cart. By the time the harvest fair arrived, Garrick had a plan. As the fair reached its peak, laughter and music filled the square. Yet, tension simmered beneath the surface. Everyone expected the Red Ruckus to strike. Garrick, however, was calm. He had rigged a series of ingenious traps using nothing but pulleys, bells, and barrels of sticky honey. When the Red Ruckus arrived, slipping through the crowd in their crimson cloaks, Garrick's traps sprang to life. Bells rang out, drawing all eyes to the culprits. Honey-drenched barrels tipped over, pinning the gang in place. The townsfolk, emboldened by the commotion, joined in to capture the outlaws, including Marla herself, who cursed Garrick's name with a begrudging smirk. As the gang was hauled away by the local guard, Garrick simply packed up his cart, refusing any grand reward. "Justice is its own payment," he said, though he accepted a warm loaf of bread and a jug of cider as thanks. From that day on, Brefford's Harvest Fair became famous not only for its wares, but for the tale of the clever tinkerer who bested the Red Ruckus. As for Garrick, he and Patch disappeared down the road, leaving behind only the faint sound of bells tinkling in the breeze. After the escapade with the Red Ruckus, Garrick wandered eastward, following winding paths and moonlit trails. His cart, a ramshackle affair of salvaged wheels and creaking boards, was packed with tinkering tools, peculiar gadgets, and Patch's favorite blanket. The dog trotted faithfully alongside, sniffing out scents and wagging his tail at curious onlookers. One evening, Garrick arrived at the edge of Cinder Hollow, a town known for its eerie reputation. The locals whispered of strange disappearances and unsettling wails that echoed through the forest at night. The heart of their troubles lay in an ancient ruin called Shadowspire Keep, perched atop a rocky hill and shrouded in mist. Curiosity gnawed at Garrick. The town reeve, a stern woman named Winara, warned him to stay away. "There's no gold in Shadowspire, only grief," she said. But Garrick's grin only widened. Grief, perhaps, but answers. That's a different kind of treasure. That night, Garrick set out with Patch and a lantern rigged with a curious blue flame that repelled the mist. The climb to Shadowspire Keep was steep and treacherous, the air thick with an unnatural chill. As they entered the ruins, Patch growled low, his mismatched eyes gleaming in the dim light. The keep was a labyrinth of crumbling stone and half-rotted wooden beams. Faint whispers echoed through the halls, growing louder with each step. Garrick studied the walls, running his fingers over ancient carvings and faint scorch marks. It didn't take long for him to piece together the truth. This wasn't the work of spirits, but of cunning bandits. The whispers were a clever trick. Pipes hidden in the walls carried sound from one room to another. Shadows danced ominously, projected by a contraption using mirrors and firelight. The bandits used fear to keep the townsfolk away while they smuggled stolen goods through the keep's forgotten tunnels. Smart, Garrick muttered, adjusting the brass gears of his lantern. But not smart enough. He and Patch crept deeper into the keep until they reached the bandits' hideout. There, the gang lounged around a makeshift camp, their stolen treasures glittering in the flickering light. Garrick set his plan in motion. With a quick twist of a knob on his lantern, the blue flame turned crimson, casting an ominous glow. He pulled out a small whistle and blew a near-silent note that Patch recognized. The dog bolted into the shadows, knocking over crates and causing an eerie cacophony. Meanwhile, Garrick's lantern sent distorted shapes dancing across the walls, making them appear like monstrous figures. The bandits panicked. The spirits are angry. One shouted, scrambling to flee. Garrick grinned, stepping into the light with Patch at his side. Spirits don't care about gold, he said, his voice calm but firm. But I do. Leave now, and you'll keep your skins. Terrified, the bandits fled, abandoning their loot and leaving Shadowspire Keep behind. Garrick dismantled their contraptions and sealed the tunnels before returning to Cinder Hollow. The townsfolk were astonished when Garrick revealed the truth. Winara, though skeptical at first, offered him a warm meal and a place to rest. But by morning, Garrick and Patch were gone, leaving behind only a small clockwork whistle that chirped like a bird when the wind blew through it. From then on, Shadowspire Keep was known not as a haunted ruin, but as a symbol of cleverness and courage. And Garrick, somewhere down another road, likely grinned as another tale began to unfold.
The Tale of the Cursed Compass.
Ah, gather round, friends, and hear of a night when stars betrayed and shadows whispered truths I wish I'd never learned. The air was thick with sea mist when my crew and I first laid eyes on the compass of Ivor Grimmel, a relic said to point not north, but to whatever your heart desired most. A dangerous artifact for greedy souls like ours. It was tucked away in a crumbling lighthouse on the edge of the Blackwater Isles, guarded by a sentinel more shadow than flesh. Now, don't get me wrong, I've faced plenty of beasts in my time, but this creature? It moved like smoke in the wind, silent and cruel, and the only warning of its presence was a faint scraping sound, like claws on stone. We crept into the lighthouse under a moon veiled in clouds, the waves below crashing like thunder against the rocks. I led the way, my blade drawn and a spell ready on my lips. The compass lay atop a pedestal in the highest room, its golden casing glinting faintly even in the dark. But the moment I stepped forward to grab it, the air turned colder than a frost giant's breath. The sentinel emerged from the walls itself, its eyes glimmering like distant stars. Its voice had spoken a tongue I didn't understand, but the meaning seeped into my mind all the same. What you seek, you shall find, but what you find will change you. Brash as I was, I snatched the compass before the thing could make its move. Its screech shook the stones loose from the walls, but we ran like devils were on our heels, tumbling down the stairs and into the night. By the time we reached the ship, the sentinel's cries had faded, but the compass's curse had only begun. You see, the artifact was true to its word. It pointed to what our hearts desired most, but none of us realized our hearts didn't always want what's best for us. For Captain Ress, it led us to a sunken treasure, yes, but he drowned trying to pull it from a wreck that should have stayed beneath the waves. For old Darien, it brought him to a forgotten love, only for her to reject him as though he were a stranger. And for me? Well, the compass pointed to a grove deep in the Whisperwood, where the trees grow so thick they blot out the sun. At the center stood a pool, so still it might as well have been a mirror. When I leaned close, it showed me my future. Not riches, not glory, but a lonely grave at the edge of the world. I hurled the cursed thing into that pool, where it sank without a ripple. But I know it's out there somewhere, waiting for the next poor fool to believe their heart's desires are worth the cost. So if ever you see a compass that doesn't point north, my friends, don't follow where it leads. Trust me, it's better to be lost. With a wink and a long pull of ale, the veteran leans back in their chair, letting the firelight cast long shadows on their weathered face. Now, they say, anyone fancy buying me another round? Stories like that don't come cheap, you know. The Whispering Labyrinth. It began in the far reaches of Halvith's Vale, where the rivers weave like silver threads through the emerald of endless forests. The townsfolk spoke of a labyrinth buried deep beneath the hills, a place of strange echoes and untold treasures. No one who had entered ever returned. Not exactly the kind of thing to discourage someone like me, though. I had a knack for solving puzzles, a sturdy blade at my hip, and a knack for weaving stories convincing enough to persuade even the reluctant. So it was that I stood at the edge of the forest one misty morning, the sun rising like a pale ember behind the hills. My companion was a weary thief named Rin. She had quick fingers, quicker wit, and a knack for getting us out of tight spots when she wasn't the one getting us into them. Together, we made quite the pair, though not without our share of arguments. The entrance to the labyrinth was hidden beneath a hill crowned with ancient oaks. It was an unassuming stone arch, half overgrown with ivy. The air that wafted from within was cool and smelled faintly of damp earth, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like blood long dried. I'd be lying if I said I didn't hesitate, just for a moment. But Rin, with her ever-present smirk, gave me a shove. "Don't tell me you're getting cold feet, Alden," she teased, her voice echoing faintly as she stepped inside. The labyrinth was a marvel. The walls were of smooth black stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and strange glyphs glimmered faintly as we passed. The air hummed, as if the place itself were alive. Our first challenge came not long after we entered a chamber with a floor covered in tiles, each marked with a different symbol. At the far end, a door stood resolutely shut. "Looks like a puzzle," Rin murmured, crouching to examine the tiles. "Step wrong, and I bet something unpleasant happens." I nodded, my eyes scanning the symbols. They seemed to correspond to constellations. I recalled an old star chart I had studied years ago and began to piece together the pattern. "We need to follow the path of the hunter," I said, pointing to a series of tiles. Rin stepped lightly across the tiles I indicated, her movements graceful as a cat. I followed more cautiously, my boots heavy on the stones. Twice we paused, once when the faint whirring of unseen mechanisms grew too loud, and again when Rin nearly slipped. But we made it to the other side, the door creaking open to reveal a long corridor. The further we ventured, the stranger the labyrinth became. Shadows flitted at the edges of our torchlight, and faint whispers seemed to emanate from the walls. Sometimes they were words familiar, taunting, but more often they were just sounds, the sigh of a forgotten breeze, the faintest echo of laughter. In one chamber, we found what seemed to be a shrine. A stone pedestal stood in the center, and upon it rested a chalice of intricately carved silver. It gleamed invitingly, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "Don't touch it," I warned as Rin's hand hovered over the chalice. "Things like this always come with a price." She snorted but withdrew her hand. "You're no fun, Alden." Instead, we examined the pedestal, discovering faint inscriptions warning of a curse. That was enough to deter even Rin. We left the chalice behind, though I could feel its pull long after we had moved on. It was near what I would later come to think of as the labyrinth's heart that we encountered our greatest challenge. A vast chamber stretched before us, its walls lined with statues of robed figures. At the center of the room stood a great crystal, glowing with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was mesmerizing, and as we approached, the whispers grew louder, resolving into a cacophony of voices. "Turn back." One voice pleaded, "Take it." Another urged. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The crystal was undoubtedly valuable, perhaps even magical, but the air thrummed with danger. Rin, ever the opportunist, reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the crystal, the statues came to life, their stone forms shedding dust and ancient grime. They moved with unnatural grace, their eyeless faces turning toward us. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Rin and pulling her back. We sprinted through the labyrinth, the sound of stone feet pounding behind us. The statues were relentless, their movements unerring despite the maze's twists and turns. At one point, we were forced to split up, with Rin darting down a narrow passage while I ducked into another. I ended up in a small chamber with no exit, a dead end. The statues were close, their shadows flickering in the torchlight. Desperation lent me clarity, and I noticed a lever embedded in the wall. Without hesitation, I pulled it. The floor beneath me gave way, and I fell into darkness. I landed in an underground stream, the cold water shocking the breath from my lungs. The current carried me forward, through a narrow tunnel, and out into another chamber. To my relief, Rin was there, drenched but grinning. "Thought you'd lost me, didn't you?" she said. Before I could respond, the statues reappeared, emerging from the walls themselves. But this time, we were ready. Rin had managed to grab a strange artifact, a small, glowing orb from the crystal chamber. She hurled it at the nearest statue, and to our amazement, it shattered, taking several of its companions with it. Emboldened, we fought back, using every trick we knew. It was a fierce battle, but eventually, the statues retreated, melting back into the walls. Wounded and weary, we pressed on, eventually finding ourselves at the labyrinth's exit. The morning sun was a welcome sight, its warmth chasing away the chill of the underground ... In the end, we left the crystal behind. It was too dangerous, too cursed, but we didn't leave empty-handed. Among the treasures we had found was a small golden amulet engraved with runes. It would later prove to be a key to another adventure, but that's a story for another night. So there you have it, the tale of the Whispering Labyrinth. Not my grandest adventure, perhaps, but one I'll never forget. Now, drink your ale and rest easy, friend, for who knows what tales tomorrow will bring. The Tale of the Pirate's Treasure. Ah, gather round, friends, and let me share with you a tale from my younger days, a tale of high seas, hidden treasure, and betrayal beneath the moonlight. It was a time when my hair was not yet flecked with silver, and my heart craved adventure like a flame sea RAVs would. I was a sailor, but not just any sailor. I had walked the decks of pirate ships and dined with scoundrels driven by whispers of gold buried beneath the sand and secrets buried in the hearts of men. It began one fateful morning, docked in a port whose name escapes me now, though the smell of brine and spice lingers sharp in my memory. The port was alive with voices, hawking wares and haggling prices. Among them was a peculiar figure, a one-eyed man with a parrot as vibrant as a sunrise perched on his shoulder. He was selling maps, or so he claimed, to the lost treasures of the sea. Curiosity led me to his stall. "What say you, sailor?" he rasped, his voice rough as the waves. "Dare you seek fortune, or has the sea tamed your heart?" His words stung my pride. I purchased his map, paying more than I should, and gathered a crew with promises of riches. We set sail by dusk, our ship cutting through the water like a blade. The map led us to the Devil's Teeth, a jagged archipelago notorious for wrecking even the sturdiest ships. Navigating it required nerves of steel and perhaps a touch of madness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first challenge reared its head. A storm, black as sin, clawed at us with howling winds and rain that lashed like whips. My crew, seasoned though they were, faltered under the ferocity of it. I barked orders, taking the helm myself, and steered us through by sheer will and a bit of luck. When dawn broke, we found ourselves anchored in a calm bay, the island from the map looming before us. It was lush and forbidding, with cliffs that rose like teeth and forests that whispered secrets. We took to shore with the map in hand, guided by its cryptic markings and the promises of untold riches. The path led us through treacherous terrain, swamps that swallowed boots, caves that played tricks with echoes, and creatures whose eyes glinted in the shadows. But it was not the dangers of the island that tested us most. It was ourselves. Greed grew among the men like a festering wound. Whispers of betrayal crept through the camp at night, and knives were sharpened in the dark. The treasure, it seemed, was not the only thing buried on this island. At last, we found the X that marked the spot. Digging began with feverish urgency. Hours passed, and then we struck at a chest, worn by time yet heavy with promise. We pried it open, revealing gold coins, glittering jewels, and relics whose worth could only be guessed. The men erupted in cheers, but I felt a knot in my gut. Riches this grand do not come without a curse. My fears were confirmed when the first musket fired. It was chaos. Friends turned to foes, fighting like rabid dogs over the treasure. I fought too, though my heart wasn't in it. Blood spilled onto the sand, and by nightfall, I was the last one standing. The treasure was mine, yet I felt only emptiness. I buried the chest again, deep in the earth, marking the spot with a simple stone. Some things, I realized, are not meant to be possessed. I returned to the ship, now eerily silent, and sailed away with the sunrise. The gold stayed behind, but the lessons sailed with me. So there you have it, my friends. A tale of greed, loss, and the fleeting nature of treasure. Perhaps it will teach you to value what truly matters, or perhaps, like me, you'll have to learn the hard way. A tale of sacrifice and light. Oh, my friends, gather close now. The fire grows low, and the night whispers its own stories through the wind outside. But before you let sleep take you, let me share one last tale, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and a forest that remembers. Far to the east, beyond mountains cloaked in eternal snow, there lies a land few dare to tread. It is not marked on any map, for the wisest cartographers know to leave it forgotten. This land holds a forest called the Whispering Vale, where the trees stand as tall as towers, their roots winding deep into the earth like claws clinging to secrets. The forest hums with a sound you feel in your bones, a music older than time, weaving tales of sorrow and longing into the air. Now, in a quiet village near that forest's edge, there lived a girl named Elenara. She was no more than 17 summers, with a fiery spirit and a sharp tongue that often got her into trouble. Her hair was as golden as wheat in the harvest, her eyes like twin embers burning with curiosity, with daring. Elenara was not the sort to wait when action could be taken, and it was this spark in her that set her apart. Her village had been struck by tragedy. One by one, the children vanished, stolen by the veil. First, it was a boy of 12, then a girl barely able to walk, and then another, and another. No one saw them go. No cries rang out. They simply disappeared, leaving behind only the chill of the forest shadow. When Elenara's little brother, Edric, was taken, her heart could bear no more. She was not content with prayers and mourning. No, she would go after him. Her elders tried to stop her, of course. They spoke of the forest's curse, of the lives it had claimed. But Elenara was stubborn. If no one else will fight for him, then I must, she declared. And so, one mist-laden evening, with a lantern in her hand and a bough across her back, she crossed the threshold into the Whispering Vale. The air changed immediately. It was heavy, thick with the weight of ages, and the light of her lantern seemed to shrink as though cowed by the forest's vastness. Every step was a whisper, every breath a question. The trees leaned in, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, almost alive. She called out, "Edric, Edric," but only the forest answered, murmuring in voices she could not understand. She walked for hours, or was it days? Time lost all meaning in the vale. Just as despair began to creep into her heart, she noticed something strange. A path appeared, marked by faintly glowing mushrooms. Their light was pale, pulsing like a heartbeat, leading her deeper into the woods. With a deep breath, she followed, clutching her lantern as if it were her only lifeline. The path led her to a glade unlike any she had seen. Moonlight poured down through a break in the canopy, bathing the clearing in an ethereal glow. At its center stood an ancient oak, its trunk gnarled and massive, its branches reaching skyward as though pleading with the heavens. And beneath the oak, there stood a figure. It was neither man nor beast, but something in between. Its form shifted, never settling a swirl of shadows, its edges blending with the night. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers buried deep in ash. And in one skeletal hand, it held a single flame, flickering yet impossibly bright. "You seek what is lost," it said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "But nothing is given without cost." Eleonora straightened her back, though her hands trembled. "I seek my brother," she replied, "and the other children too. What cost must I pay?" The shadowed figure tilted its head as if amused. "You would give much, yet you do not know the price. Your youth, your laughter, your dreams, would you cast them all aside?" She hesitated then, her courage faltering for just a moment. But the memory of Edric, his laughter echoing in her mind, steeled her resolve. "Take it all," she said. "Take whatever you wish. Just give them back." The figure's laughter was like breaking branches, sharp and unsettling. "So be it," it said, and the flame in its hand flared brightly. The light filled the glade, blinding her, and for a moment she felt as though her very soul was being unraveled. When the light faded, she saw them, Edric and the other children, standing beneath the oak. They were pale, trembling, but alive. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed to her brother, pulling him into her arms. But she noticed something else too. Her hands, once steady and strong, now trembled with age. Her golden hair had turned white, and her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of the forest sorrow. The shadow was gone, leaving only the faintest whisper in the wind. The veil remembers. Eleonora led the children home, and though the village rejoiced, they mourned her sacrifice. She had saved them all, but she had given everything in return. For the rest of her days, she was a quiet figure, her fiery spirit dimmed but not extinguished. She had faced the darkness, and though it had changed her, it had not claimed her. And so, my friends, let her story be a reminder. The path of courage is rarely easy, and the greatest light is often kindled in the deepest shadow. Now, sleep well, and dream of forests that whisper and heroes who dare to answer. Pull up a chair and listen closely, for this is a story best enjoyed with a hearty laugh and a mug of something strong in hand. Many years ago, in the bustling mountain city of Stonehearth, there lived a stout dwarf named Thrumley Copperbeard. Thrumley was renowned for two things: his magnificent fiery red beard that seemed to glow in the torchlight, and his obsession with brewing the perfect mead. He worked tirelessly in his brewery, hidden deep within the mountain, crafting concoctions that had won the hearts of dwarves, humans, and even the elusive forest elves. Now, Thrumley was a perfectionist, and he was forever tinkering with his recipes. One fateful day, he decided he would create a mead so potent and flavorful it would become the stuff of legends. A drop of this mead, he proclaimed to his apprentice, shall warm the coldest hearts and embolden the weakest souls. He gathered rare ingredients from across the lands, golden honey from the sunlit glades, moonflower nectar that only blossomed under the full moon, and a pinch of sparkling frost salt from the ice peak caverns. Mixing them all in a colossal cauldron, he cackled with glee. But Thrumley, in his excitement, forgot one crucial detail. The fermenting process had to be controlled carefully. Instead of waiting for the brew to settle and ferment properly, Thrumley decided to accelerate the process using a bit of alchemy. He added a magical crystal shard, said to imbue energy into anything it touched. The moment the shard hit the bubbling mead, the entire cauldron began to shake violently. "That's new," Thrumley muttered as he took a cautious step back. Before he could utter another word, the cauldron exploded with a thunderous roar. Golden mead erupted like a geyser, drenching everything in its path, including Thrumley, his apprentice, and half the brewery. The force of the blast was so strong, it blew open the stone doors of the brewery, sending a torrent of frothy mead cascading down the mountain and straight into the streets of Stonehearth. Dwarves, humans, and even a few unlucky goblins found themselves swept away by the sweet, sticky flood. Chaos ensued as the streets turned into rivers of honeyed booze. Children floated by on barrels. Dogs lapped up the mead with unbridled glee, and merchants desperately tried to save their wares from being soaked. Thrumley, drenched and coughing up bubbles of mead, staggered out of the ruins of his brewery. His apprentice, covered head to toe in honey, looked at him with wide eyes. "Master Thrumley," he stammered, "what have we done?" The dwarf stared at the sticky chaos below, then let out a hearty laugh. "We've given the city its greatest festival yet." And indeed, the people of Stonehearth turned the disaster into a celebration. They called it the Great Mead Flood, and every year since, they've honored the event with a festival where barrels of mead flow freely through the streets, and Thrumley Copperbeard is celebrated as a hero, albeit a slightly reckless one. As for Thrumley, he rebuilt his brewery and learned to respect the art of patience. But even so, whispers say he still keeps a shard of that magical crystal hidden away, just in case he ever feels like making history again. The Tale of the Star-Forged Blade. Oh, a magical sword, you say? Well, let me tell you of a blade I once encountered, a sword unlike any other, forged not by mortal hands, but by the very essence of the stars themselves. Settle in, friends, for this tale is long, winding, and full of wonder. It began on a night when the moon was but a sliver in the sky, and the stars shimmered brighter than I'd ever seen. I had just returned from a harrowing expedition deep within the Everfrost caverns, my pack heavy with treasures and my mind eager for the comforts of a warm fire and a good ale. But as I entered a quiet village nestled at the foot of the Frostspire Mountains, an old storyteller, much like myself, come to think of it, caught my ear. He spoke of a sword, one said to hold the power to sever the threads of fate itself. Have you ever heard such a claim? No? Well, neither had I, and at the time, I dismissed it as little more than drunken rambling. But the way he spoke, there was a glint in his eye, an urgency to his words that stirred something in me. "Seek the star-forged blade," he whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell the spiced mead on his breath. "You'll find it where the heavens touch the earth. Now, I've heard plenty of riddles in my time, but this one gnawed at me. Where the heavens touch the earth, what could that mean? A mountaintop, perhaps? A sacred grove? I pondered his words as I warmed my hands by the inn's hearth, the embers crackling like the distant hum of the cosmos. And before I knew it, my curiosity got the better of me. I set out the very next morning, following the clues left by that cryptic old man. The journey was no small feat, let me tell you. Through dense forests where the trees seemed to whisper secrets to one another, across rivers so cold they could freeze the marrow in your bones, and over jagged peaks that clawed at the sky itself. But it was on the seventh night, under a canopy of stars that seemed impossibly close, that I found it, a hidden vale, bathed in an ethereal glow. Friends, I wish I could show you what I saw that night. The veil was like a world apart, untouched by time or decay. At its center stood a pedestal of crystalline stone, and upon it rested the blade. Even from a distance, I could feel its presence, a hum in the air, a pull in my very soul. The sword was unlike any I'd ever seen. Its hilt was crafted from a metal that seemed to shift and shimmer like liquid silver under moonlight. And the blade, oh, the blade. It was a thing of pure starlight, glowing faintly with an inner fire that danced and flickered with every breath of wind. But as I approached, the air grew heavy, and a voice, yes, a voice, echoed in my mind. Only the worthy may wield me, it said, clear and resonant as a bell tolling in the stillness. Now I've faced my share of challenges, but there was something about that voice that sent a shiver down my spine. Still, I wasn't about to turn back after coming all that way. I reached for the sword, and as my fingers brushed the hilt, the world around me seemed to dissolve. I was no longer in the veil, but in a vast expanse of stars, as if I had stepped into the very fabric of the universe. And there, standing before me, was a figure cloaked in light. It didn't speak, but its presence was commanding, and I knew I was being judged. The trials, my friends, oh, the trials. They tested every part of me, my strength, my will, my very essence. But I'll save the details of those for another time. Suffice it to say, when I emerged, I held the star-forged blade in my hand. And let me tell you, it was worth every challenge, every ounce of pain and doubt. The sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, when the odds seem insurmountable, there is a light that can guide us. And sometimes, that light comes from within. Now, let me tell you, passing those trials didn't make me its master. It merely made me worthy to carry it. And that blade, friends, it carried a burden heavier than any treasure I'd ever hoisted onto my back. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You see, the moment I emerged from that celestial expanse, sword in hand, I realized I wasn't alone. Standing there in the veil, the star-forged blade in my grip, I felt it before I saw it, a presence lurking in the shadows. A low hum resonated, different from the sword's song, deeper, darker. I turned slowly, and there, emerging from the mist, like a nightmare-given form, was a creature I cannot easily describe. It was as if the night itself had gathered into a shape, with eyes that burned like dying embers. It didn't speak, but its intent was clear. The sword was its target, and I was merely an obstacle. Now I've faced many a foe in my time, from bandits to beasts, but this was different. It moved like smoke, one moment solid, the next dissipating into the air, only to reform inches from my face. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the blade it poised in my hand almost as if guiding me. I raised it, and a beam of starlight erupted, cutting through the creature like dawn breaking the night. But that was only the beginning. You see, the sword wasn't content to be wielded. It demanded more. Each strike, each swing was a dance, and I was merely following its lead. The battle raged on, the veil lighting up with bursts of brilliance and shadow. By the end of it, I stood alone, the creature reduced to a faint wisp carried away by the wind. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I realized the sword had bound itself to me not as a weapon, but as a companion. From that day forward, the star-forged blade and I were inseparable. It led me to places I'd never dreamed of, hidden realms, forgotten temples, and even through the very fabric of reality itself. Each step was a lesson, each battle a test. And yet, for all its power, the sword had a sorrow about it, a longing. It wasn't just a tool. It had a purpose, a destiny I was yet to understand. You see, as I descended from that fateful valley, the blade no longer felt like just a part of me. It was as if the stars themselves had placed a fragment of their soul into my hand. The journey onward was not one of triumph or ease, mind you. The sword's transformation had stirred forces that had long lain dormant, and I soon learned the price of wielding such a weapon. The first sign came as I crossed the plains of echoes, a desolate expanse where the wind carried the voices of the past. One night, as I camped under a sky veiled by thick clouds, the wind changed. It grew still, unnaturally so, and the air hummed with an oppressive tension. That's when they came. They called themselves the Watchers, though whether they were men, spirits, or something in between, I cannot say. They wore armor that seemed carved from obsidian and moved with a grace that defied their size. There were 3 of them, their eyes glowing faintly like the embers of a dying fire. "The blade is not yours," one of them intoned, their voice a deep rumble that resonated in my chest. "It belongs to the first light, and you're but a fleeting shadow. I don't know what possessed me to stand my ground. Perhaps it was the sword's influence, or perhaps it was sheer stubbornness." "The blade chose me," I replied, gripping it tightly as its glow intensified. The Watchers didn't respond with words, but with action. They moved as one, swift and unrelenting, their weapons singing as they struck. But the blade, oh, it was alive in my hands. It guided me, not just in defense, but in understanding. Each strike was not just a clash of steel, but a test of my resolve, a dance of fate and fire. The battle was unlike anything I'd ever faced. The Watchers were relentless, their movements a symphony of precision and power. Yet, the blade seemed to anticipate them, its light flaring with every parry and counterstrike. As the fight wore on, I felt a connection, a strange familiarity, as if the blade and I were unlocking memories buried deep within the fabric of time itself. When the dust settled, I stood alone, the Watchers vanquished, their forms dissolving into the wind like ashes scattered to the void. But their final words haunted me. "The first light will come," they had said, their voices fading into the ether. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew the journey was far from over. In the weeks that followed, the blade began to change again. Its glow grew brighter, its hum deeper, and I began to hear whispers, not voices like the Watchers or the spires, but soft, distant murmurs, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. They guided me to places I would never have found on my own, hidden groves, where ancient runes pulsed with forgotten power, ruins that echoed with the laughter of a time long past, and caverns where the air shimmered with an unnatural light. Each place held a fragment of a greater puzzle, a piece of a story older than the stars themselves. The blade was not merely a weapon or a key. It was a map, a guide to a destiny I could barely comprehend. And with each step, I felt the weight of that destiny grow heavier, the burden of knowing that I was not just a bearer of the blade, but a part of its story. Every tale, no matter how grand, must find its end, though I warn you, the ending of this story is not what you might expect. You see, the star-forged blade and I continued our journey, unraveling the secrets it carried, facing trials that tested not just my strength, but the very core of who I was. The whispers grew louder, the visions clearer, and at last, I came to understand the blade's purpose. It wasn't just a weapon or a relic of some forgotten age. No, it was a beacon, a fragment of the first light, as the Watchers had called it, the primordial force that birthed the stars, the worlds, and all that lies between. The blade's power wasn't meant for destruction or dominion, but for restoration. It was a thread of the universe itself, a tool to mend what had been torn apart, to heal what had been broken. This revelation came to me in the celestial wastes, a barren land where the sky itself seemed fractured, its stars scattered like shards of glass. The sword led me to the heart of this desolation, where a rift pulls with chaotic energy, a wound in the fabric of reality. The whispers became a roar, the blade glowing brighter than ever, and I knew what had to be done. The sword was not mine to keep. It was mine to return. As I plunged the blade into the rift, the world around me dissolved into light. I felt the energy of the blade flowing through me, a torrent of memories, emotions, and knowledge beyond comprehension. It was as if I had become one with the stars themselves, a fleeting part of something infinite. And then there was silence. When I awoke, I was back in the vale where I had first found the blade. The pedestal was empty, the crystalline stone cold and silent. The sword was gone, its purpose fulfilled, its journey complete. I should have felt sorrow, perhaps, but all I felt was peace. The weight of the blade was gone, and in its place was a sense of fulfillment, of having played my part in a story far greater than myself. And so, here I am, telling you this tale. The blade is gone, its light returned to the stars, but its story lives on in me, and now in you. Perhaps one day, the stars will call again, and another will rise to carry the light. Until then, we must find our own light, our own purpose, and carry it forward. Oh, but look at me, getting sentimental in my old age. The hour grows late, my friends, and the fire is burning low. Let us drink to the star-forged blade, to the mysteries of the cosmos, and to the strength within us all to face the unknown. And with that, I bid you good night. The Silver Blade of Eldarin Vale. Let me tell you the tale of Velith Caledorn, the elven swordmaster, whose name is whispered in awe across the ancient forests of Eldarin Vale and sung in ballads among the bards of human courts. The story begins in the twilight of the summer solstice, deep in the heart of the gleaming thicket, where the silver leaves of the elderwood trees shimmer under the moonlight. Velith was a young elf then, just over a century old, barely an adult by elven standards. He trained tirelessly in the ways of the blade, his twin sabers a blur of silver and steel. His movements were graceful yet lethal, like the dance of a shadow in moonlight. He was not born into greatness. Valeth's lineage was modest, a family of hunters and scouts, not warriors. But he carried within him an unrelenting hunger to perfect his craft. Day after day, he sparred with other trainees, and night after night, he practiced alone, his blades slicing through the air with precision that could only be achieved through obsession. One fateful evening, as Veleth honed his skills, the forest grew eerily silent. The usual symphony of crickets and rustling leaves had vanished, replaced by an oppressive stillness. From the darkness emerged a shadowy figure cloaked in flowing black robes, its face obscured beneath a mask of bone. It was a shade warden, a servant of the nether abyss, drawn to the land to spread its corruption. The creature exuded an aura of despair, its skeletal fingers gripping a dark, run scimitar that seemed to hum with malevolent energy. "Step aside, young elf," the shade warden hissed, its voice like wind through dead branches. "The elderwood shall fall, as all things must." Veleth did not step aside. Instead, he raised his twin sabers, their mirrored edges gleaming in defiance of the shadow. He had never faced a foe like this before, but courage burned hot within his heart. The duel that followed became legend. The Shade Warden struck first, its blade descending with the weight of an avalanche. Veleth parried, his reflexes honed to near perfection. The clash of their weapons rang out like thunder, shattering the oppressive silence. The Warden's strikes were relentless, fueled by dark magic, but Veleth's movements were poetry in motion. He weaved around each blow, his sabers singing through the air. Hours seemed to pass in the span of minutes as the two combatants danced between life and death. Veleth's arms burned, his breaths came in gasps, but he refused to yield. He remembered the words of his mentor: "The sword is not just a weapon. It is an extension of your will. If your spirit remains unbroken, no foe can claim victory." With a roar, Veleth executed a maneuver he had only ever practiced in solitude. He crossed his blades in a spiraling arc, channeling his energy into a single strike aimed at the Warden's core. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause as the sabers met the Shade Warden's chest, unleashing a burst of silver light that banished the darkness. When the brilliance faded, the Shade Warden was gone, reduced to a wisp of shadow that melted into the earth. Veleth stood victorious, though his body trembled with exhaustion. The forest seemed to exhale, life returning in the form of chirping crickets and the rustle of leaves. From that day on, Veleth Caledorn became known as the Silver Blade of Eldarin Vale, a guardian of the forest and a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. His legend inspired generations of elves, and his tale is still told in hushed tones whenever the forest grows quiet and the moonlight dances on the silver leaves of the elderwood. The Harbinger of the Thicket. This a tale that sends shivers down the spine, a story whispered among the villagers of Hollowshade, where the forest itself holds its breath at night. This is the tale of the Harbinger of the Thicket. The village of Hollowshade sat nestled in a valley, bordered by the ominous Dreadwood Forest. The trees there grew unnaturally tall and twisted, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. For years, the villagers avoided the woods after dark. Strange sounds, low growls, guttural whispers, and an occasional wailing scream echoed from the shadows, chilling all who heard them. No one knew the origin of the forest's curse, only that anyone who ventured too deep into the Dreadwood either never returned or came back. Wrong. Those who emerged bore vacant eyes and stammered about a creature, part shadow, part flesh, with glowing eyes that burned like twin embers in the dark. It wasn't until a young shepherd named Leoric went missing that the village elder, Marin, decided to act. Leoric had been last seen chasing a stray lamb near the forest's edge at dusk. By dawn, only the lamb returned, trembling and bloodied. The villagers whispered of the harbinger, a beast said to mark its prey with a sigil of fear before dragging them into the shadows, their screams swallowed by the night. Marin gathered a small group of villagers' brave souls armed with torches, pitchforks, and a single rusted blade and ventured into the forest. The air grew colder with every step, the towering trees weaving a canopy so dense it blocked out the sun. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, curling around the villagers like unseen hands. As they pressed deeper, the first sign of the beast appeared. A claw mark raked across a tree trunk, oozing sap as black as tar. The mark radiated a faint pulsing glow, casting an eerie light on the ground. Beside it, they found Leoric's scarf, torn and spattered with crimson. "We should turn back," muttered one villager, his voice trembling. But Marin shook his head, gripping his staff tighter. The beast must be confronted, or its hunger will never stop. The group moved on, their courage unraveling with every step. Then they heard a sound like bones snapping, followed by a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from all directions. The villagers froze, their torches flickering as a chill wind swept through the trees. From the shadows it emerged. The harbinger was unlike any creature they had imagined. It was massive, hunched yet towering, its form shrouded in a miasma of darkness that seemed alive. Its skin was slick and stretched over a skeletal frame, with patches of fur that bristled like needles. Two glowing eyes pierced the gloom, and its mouth was a jagged maw filled with teeth that gleamed like shards of obsidian. Its claws, long and curved, glistened with the blood of countless victims. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance before anyone could react. The torches flared and died as the beast's shadow enveloped them, its growl vibrating through their bones. One villager screamed and ran, only to be snatched by a tendril of shadow and dragged into the dark, his cries cut short by a wet, sickening crunch. "Form a circle," Marin shouted, his voice steadied despite the terror coursing through him. The remaining villagers obeyed, brandishing their weapons as the harbinger circled them. Its movements eerily silent except for the crackle of its claws on the forest floor. Marin muttered an ancient incantation, one he had learned from his grandmother, a hedge witch, who once claimed the Dreadwood was home to a primordial spirit. As he finished the chant, the head of his staff ignited with a pale blue flame, casting the darkness away. The harbinger recoiled, its shadowy form flickering like a dying flame. Seizing the moment, the villagers lunged with their weapons. The beast let out a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to carry the anguish of all its victims. The fight was brutal, the harbinger's claws slicing through their ranks like a scythe through wheat. But Marin held firm, his staff's light driving the creature back inch by inch. Finally, with a desperate cry, Marin plunged the staff into the beast's chest. The blue flame surged, consuming the harbinger in a blinding blaze. Its roar faded into a haunting wail as its form dissolved into ash, scattering into the wind. The survivors stumbled back to Hollowshead at dawn, battered and forever scarred. The Dreadwood was quieter after that night, but the villagers knew its silence was not a promise of peace. The harbinger was gone for now, but the forest remained a place of shadow and whispers. And so, the tale lives on. Children are told to heed the warnings of the elders, to stay clear of the forest's edge. For though the harbinger was vanquished, the dreadwood always hungers, and its shadows are never truly empty. The blind swordsman and his loyal dog. It is said that in the farthest reaches of the world, where mist hangs heavy over jade-green forests and rivers sing through valleys, there lived a swordsman known only as Kenji the Blind. His legend spread across the land like whispers on the wind, for though he was robbed of sight, no man nor beast could match his blade. Kenji's life was shaped by tragedy. Once a promising warrior in a noble house, he lost his sight to betrayal. Poison slipped into his wine during a celebration. When he awoke, the world was dark, and his enemies believed him finished. But blindness, Kenji would later say, was not the end. It was the beginning of clarity. By his side walked Haru, a shaggy black dog with bright amber eyes, as if the sun itself had taken shelter in his gaze. Haru had appeared in Kenji's darkest hour, when the swordsman had stumbled through the forest, weak and helpless. The dog had found him at the edge of a riverbank, growling away predators and nudging his shoulder until he rose. From that moment on, they were as one. Swordsman and hound, shadow and blade. Kenji, though blind, had honed his other senses to near perfection. He could hear the faintest shift of footsteps across sand, the hiss of steel as it left its sheath, the hum of a dragonfly brushing past his ear. Haru was his guide, his partner in combat, and his constant companion. Together, they wandered from village to village, a pair of vagabonds, their names both feared and revered. One such tale begins in a small mountain village gripped by terror. For weeks, the villagers spoke of a demon that emerged at night, an enormous beast with claws like daggers and teeth that shone like polished ivory. Livestock disappeared, and those brave enough to face the monster vanished into the fog. Desperate, the village elder sought Kenji's help. Kenji and Haru arrived as shadows stretched long and the crimson sun dipped below the peaks. Villagers peered nervously from behind doors and curtains as the blind swordsman, dressed in tattered robes, leaned on his wooden staff, led only by the gentle tug of Haru's leash. The elder begged him, "Master Kenji, we have little to offer, but this demon will ruin us. Will you stand against it?" Kenji smiled faintly. "I do not fight for gold," he said softly, "but for peace. Lead me to the beast. Double quotes at midnight, under the pale light of a crescent moon." Kenji and Haru stood at the edge of the forest. The mist curled like serpents through the trees. Haru growled low, his hackles raised, as a heavy, thundering sound echoed through the woods, the breathing of something colossal. Kenji slid his sword, a blade of unmatched sharpness, slowly from its sheath. Though he could not see, he closed his eyes as if to sharpen his other senses. The beast burst forth from the shadows, a nightmare of fur, fangs, and fiery eyes, taller than a hut, with claws that tore furrows into the earth. It roared, the sound shaking leaves from the trees. Haru barked once, leapt forward, and circled the creature, his barking a constant distraction. Kenji listened intently. To the sound of claws scraping the dirt, the whoosh of the beast's swinging limbs, the ragged huff of its breath. He moved as if guided by the wind itself. The villagers watching from a safe distance, could hardly believe their eyes. Kenji ducked and turned with grace, avoiding the monster's deadly swipes. Haru barked and snarled, darting just out of reach, drawing the beast's focus. Then, in a single heartbeat, Kenji stilled. The monster lunged. Kenji whispered. Now Haru let out a sharp bark, and in that instant, the swordsman's blade sang. A single stroke, swift and final, cut through the air. The creature howled, its roar dying as its massive body collapsed into the mist. Silence followed, broken only by the wind rustling the trees and Haru's soft panting. When dawn broke, the villagers found Kenji and Haru sitting quietly at the edge of the woods. The swordsman's blade was clean, as though it had never tasted blood. The beast was gone, its body already dissolving into smoke, for it was no ordinary creature, but a demon cursed to roam the earth. The villagers fell to their knees in gratitude. Kenji only nodded, turning to leave with Haru at his side. As they vanished into the morning fog, a young boy called out, "How did you know where to strike? How can you fight without sight?" Kenji paused, his hand resting lightly on Haru's back. Without turning, he replied, "I see the world as it truly is, with the heart, not the eyes. And with Haru, I am never alone," and so they disappeared once more, two wanderers on a path known only to them. Wherever they went, peace followed. And to this day, in quiet villages and forgotten taverns, tales of the blind swordsman and his loyal dog are still told, whispered over cups of sake in crackling fires, a story that lives on with every telling. Kenji and the Wraith of the Whispering Marsh. The marshlands of Yurei no Numa, the ghost marsh, were a place of dread. Travelers who strayed too far into the mist would often vanish, their cries swallowed by the thick air. Locals said it was cursed, a land where the dead refused to rest. Those who returned spoke of whispering voices, invisible hands tugging at their clothes, and pale figures lurking in the reeds. And so, no soul dared approach it, until a grieving father came to Kenji. Kenji was seated in a quiet corner of a mountain tea house, Haru at his side, when the man arrived. A humble farmer with hollow eyes and trembling hands. "Master Kenji," he begged, "my daughter wandered into the ghost marsh 3 nights ago. Her lantern was found at the edge, but there is no sign of her. The villagers say she is lost to the wraiths, but she is all I have. Please, if anyone can bring her back." "It is you." Kenji sat in silence for a long moment. His unseeing eyes turned toward the wind, as if listening to something far away. Finally, he stood and gave a small nod. "Haru," he whispered. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes sharp, ears twitching as though he too sensed the task ahead. Together, swordsman and dog followed the farmer to the edge of the marsh. By twilight, the marsh seemed alive. The air was heavy and wet, and the reeds swayed as though they were speaking to one another. The fog rolled thick and gray, swallowing all sound but the slow trickle of dark water. Kenji stepped forward, his bare feet sinking into the soft ground. Haru moved ahead, nose to the earth, ears flicking at every sound. "Stay close, Haru," Kenji murmured, and then he heard it. A whisper. At first, it was faint, like a breeze through the reeds. But soon it became clear, a voice soft and childlike, calling from deep within the fog. "Help me, please." Kenji's grip tightened on his sword. It was the voice of the farmer's daughter, or so it seemed. But Kenji knew better than to trust the marsh. He tilted his head, listening closely, his senses reaching out into the mist. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the whispers multiplied. They came from all sides, soft as silk, but full of malice. Some voices laughed, others wept. Fingers of mist clawed at Kenji's robes. A lesser man would have turned back, but the blind swordsman strode on, his faith in Haru unshaken. Suddenly, Haru froze. His growl rumbled low and deep. Kenji stopped, hand on his sword. From the fog, a shape emerged. A young girl in a tattered kimono, her hair hanging limp over her face. "Help me," she whispered. "Please, sir." "I'm so lost." Kenji's sightless gaze fixed upon her. Though blind, he could sense something was wrong. Her steps made no sound, and the air around her was unnaturally still. Haru snarled louder, teeth bared. "You were the voice of the living," Kenji said softly. "But you do not belong to this world." The girl's head snapped up. Her face suddenly withered and gray, her eyes empty pits of darkness. She opened her mouth, and a horrible wail erupted. High and shrill, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The wraith lunged. Kenji moved with the swiftness of a striking serpent. His blade left its sheath, slicing through the air with a sound like a whisper. The wraith's cry was cut short as Kenji turned, his blade flashing in the dim light. Silence. The mist swirled violently as the wraith's form crumbled into shadows, dispersing into the air. But Kenji knew this was only the beginning. The whispers around him grew louder. Angry now, a chorus of the forgotten dead. From the fog, more wraiths came. Pale hands reached for him, their faces twisted with sorrow and rage. "Haru," Kenji called. The loyal dog darted forward, weaving through the mist, barking ferociously as he harried the spirits. Kenji turned his body, every swing of his blade precise, cutting through the restless dead like wind through grass. He did not falter, did not hesitate. To watch him was to witness a man who saw not with his eyes, but with every fiber of his being. The wraiths fell one by one, their forms dissolving like smoke, their anguished cries fading into the night. When the final spirit was silenced, the marsh fell still. Kenji stood with his sword at his side, his breathing calm and measured. Haru returned to his master, his fur damp and his amber eyes bright with vigilance. Then, from the reeds, they heard a faint sobbing, a sound that did not belong to the dead. Haru led the way, and there, huddled beneath the twisted roots of an old tree, they found her, the farmer's daughter, alive but weak, her face streaked with tears. Kenji knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "You are safe now." She clung to his arm as Haru nuzzled her hand, his warm presence a comfort against the chill of the marsh. Together, they made their way back, the mist parting before them as though even the marsh itself dared not stand in their way. At dawn, when they returned to the village, the farmer wept as he embraced his daughter, bowing deeply before Kenji. "Master Kenji," he said, "you have done what no man dared to do. How can we ever repay you?" Kenji shook his head, his hand resting lightly on Haru's back. "The living must guide the living home," he said quietly. "That is payment enough, and so." The swordsman and his loyal dog disappeared once more into the morning haze, leaving behind a village forever changed and a story that would be told for generations. The tale of Kenji and the Wraith of the Whispering Marsh. Kenji and the Gnome's Missing Cat. In a quiet, forgotten part of the forest, where mushrooms grew as big as stools and fireflies glowed like lanterns, there lived a peculiar little gnome named Tibbin Knockroot. Tibbin was not like most gnomes. He was a tinker by trade, always tinkering with strange devices that whirred, clicked, and clattered. His only companion in his solitary life was his plump, mischievous orange cat, Saffron. But one afternoon, Saffron did not come home. Tibbin searched high and low, under tree roots, in hollow logs, and even up in the high boughs where she liked to nap. But the cat was nowhere to be found. As night fell, Tibbin became frantic. The forest could be a dangerous place after dark, even for a cat as clever as Saffron. Desperate, he remembered an old tale of a swordsman who could defeat monsters and demons alike. A man who saw without seeing and who traveled with a great black hound. Tibbin had heard whispers that the swordsman passed through nearby woods. And so, with his little gnomish courage and a satchel of tools, Tibbin set off to find the blind swordsman. Tibbin found Kenji and Haru near the forest's edge. Kenji was seated beneath an ancient tree, resting as the soft hum of cicadas filled the air. Haru lay beside him, ears twitching, listening to the sounds of the world. When Tibbin approached, his footsteps barely audible on the mossy ground, Haru raised his head, his golden eyes glowing in the dusk. "Excuse me, Master Swordsman," Tibbin squeaked. "I need help." "Well, it's not really me. It's my cat. She's missing, and she's my only friend. Please, can you and your hound find her?" Kenji turned his face toward the small voice. Though he could not see, the gnome's trembling words told him everything he needed to know. "A cat, you say?" Kenji's voice was calm. "And where did you last see her?" Tibbin's voice quivered. "Near the old mushroom grove, but I heard strange sounds out there. I think something's taken her." Kenji rose, smoothing out his tattered robes. "Haru," he murmured, and the loyal hound stood at his side, ready for the task. "Lead the way, little one," Kenji said. "Let us find your friend." The old mushroom grove was a place of wonder and unease. Towering mushrooms dotted the clearing like crooked houses, their caps glowing faintly in shades of blue and green. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the air felt thick, as though it held its breath. Haru's nose twitched, and he let out a low, short bark. "Something's here," Kenji said quietly, his hand resting on his sheathed sword. "Something that shouldn't be." Tibbin clutched his satchel nervously. "Do you think it has saffron?" Kenji tilted his head, listening to the world around him. "Patience, little one." Suddenly, from behind a massive mushroom, there came a sound. A soft, lilting meow. Tibbin's face lit up. "That's her. That's Saffron." But before he could rush forward, Haru growled. A deep, rumbling warning that made the gnome freeze in his tracks. Kenji turned his face toward the source of the sound. He could sense it now, a presence lurking just out of sight. "Show yourself," Kenji said softly. From the shadows came a rustling, followed by a skittering sound, like claws scraping against stone. Emerging into the faint light of the mushrooms was a creature that looked part spider, part shadow, with too many legs and glowing white eyes. Clutched in its spindly grasp, unharmed but indignant, was Saffron, the plump orange cat. Tibbin gasped. "The shade spinner," he cried. "It's a creature of the dark. It steals shiny things and soft things for its nest." Kenji smiled faintly. Double quotes Haru dot double quotes dot at his command. Haru lunged forward, barking ferociously, his voice echoing through the grove. The shade spinner hissed, its many legs scattering over the ground as it tried to retreat into the darkness. But Haru was fast, snapping and growling, forcing the creature to drop its prize. Saffron tumbled to the ground with a startled thump. "Grab her, Tibbin," Kenji ordered calmly. Tibbin rushed forward, scooping Saffron into his arms. The cat meowed in protest, but buried her face in his chest, her purring starting up like a little motor. The shade spinner, sensing its defeat, hissed once more before disappearing into the shadows, its glowing eyes vanishing like fading embers. Kenji turned to Tibbin. "She is safe. Let us leave this place." Back at Tibbin's cozy little burrow beneath an old oak tree, the gnome fed Saffron a bowl of cream while babbling his endless thanks to Kenji and Haru. "I don't know how to repay you," Tibbin exclaimed, his voice squeaking with gratitude. "You've saved my dear Saffron. Please, let me make something for you. A new blade? A charm for your dog?" Kenji shook his head, seated on the floor near the fire. "No payment is needed," Haru stretched out lazily on the rug. Let out a contented huff. Saffron, as if sensing the large dog's kindness, padded over and curled up beside him. Haru raised an eyebrow, but didn't move, allowing the plump cat to nestle against his fur. Tibbin beamed at the sight. "Well, at least stay for tea. You're heroes to us, after all." Kenji allowed a small smile. Tea would be most welcome, and so, beneath the soft glow of firelight, the blind swordsman, his loyal dog, and a grateful gnome shared an evening of quiet peace. The sound of purring and crackling wood filling the air. From that day on, Tibbin told everyone he met about the blind swordsman who saved his cat, though some found the tale hard to believe. But deep in the forest, beneath the roots of an old oak tree, a gnome and his cat knew the truth, and they would never forget the kindness of Kenji and Haru. A light between worlds. A cool mist hung low over the valley as Kenji and Haru padded along an ancient, overgrown path. The sound of the blind swordsman's staff tapping against the stones mingled with the gentle rustle of Haru's padded paws. The pair had been traveling for days, following rumors of a mysterious village that appeared only under the light of the full moon. As night fell, the pair arrived at the edge of a dense forest. Kenji paused, tilting his head toward the faint sound of a bell chiming softly in the distance. Haru's ears perked, and the loyal dog gave a low, questioning growl. "Easy, Haru," Kenji murmured, his hand brushing the top of Haru's head. "Do you hear it? The bell guides us. Let's see where it leads." They entered the forest, where the mist thickened and the air turned strangely warm. The bells chiming grew louder, and before long, a dim, flickering light appeared through the trees. As they approached, Kenji discerned the faint outline of a lantern swaying gently in the air, though there were no hands to hold it and no pole to support it. A hollow, echoing voice came from the lantern. Traveler, why do you wander so deep into the woods? Kenji stood still, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. I am searching for a village that appears under the moonlight. Do you know of such a place? The lantern bobbed in the air, its light pulsing with what seemed like amusement. Many seek the village, but few find it. What will you offer in return for my guidance? Kenji hesitated, but Haru stepped forward, wagging his tail slightly as if sensing no immediate threat. I offer only my purpose, Kenji said after a moment. To protect the innocent, to right wrongs, and to walk the path of balance. If this village needs my aid, I will give it. The lantern paused, its light steadying. Very well, it said. Follow me, but beware. This path requires more than courage. It requires clarity of heart. For hours, the lantern led them through twisting trails, each more surreal than the last. Trees grew in impossible spirals. The ground shimmered like liquid silver, and strange whispers echoed around them. Yet Kenji walked steadily, trusting in his senses and Haru's calm presence. At last, they emerged into a clearing bathed in moonlight. There stood the village, its buildings ancient yet pristine, glowing faintly as if made of moonlight themselves. Villagers moved silently, their faces pale and ethereal. The lantern stopped at the village gate and spoke one last time. This place is caught between worlds. Its people are lost souls trapped by regret. If you wish to free them, you must uncover the truth of their sorrow and offer them peace. Kenji nodded, his resolve unwavering. With Haru at his side, he stepped into the village, ready to face whatever truths awaited. Kenji felt the air change as he stepped into the village. It was colder, almost weightless, as though he'd passed into a dream. Haru stayed close, his fur bristling but his steps steady. The villagers moved like shadows, their expressions blank and their eyes downcast. Kenji stopped near a well at the center of the village, tilting his head toward faint murmurs drifting through the air. They weren't voices but a melody, a sorrowful tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. What do you hear, Haru? Kenji asked softly, crouching to feel the ground. Haru sniffed, then let out a soft whine, nudging Kenji toward the well. Kenji reached out, his fingers brushing the cold stone of the well's rim. The melody grew louder, pulling at the edges of his mind. He could sense the well held something powerful, something aching to be heard. A voice broke the silence behind him. You feel it too, don't you? Kenji stood, turning toward the sound. A young woman stood there, her figure faintly translucent, her face streaked with ethereal tears. She looked at him with a mixture of hope and despair. Who are you? Kenji asked, his tone calm but firm. My name is Ayumi, she said. I was once the caretaker of this village, but now we are prisoners of our own sorrow. Kenji rested a hand on Haru's head. Tell me, Ayumi, what binds you here? Ayumi gestured toward the well. Long ago, the village fell under attack. We had a relic, a sacred lantern that could repel any evil, but our fear consumed us. We extinguished its light, thinking it would hide us. The darkness claimed us instead. Now we are trapped, unable to move on. Kenji frowned, his fingers brushing the hilt of his katana. And the lantern in the woods. Is it the same? Ayumi nodded. It escaped the village when we extinguished it. but its light remains tied to the sorrow of our choice. If you can reignite its flame, perhaps it will free us. Kenji reached into his satchel and withdrew a flint. I will try. Show me the way. Ayumi's eyes brightened faintly as she led him back to the well. The flame must be kindled with courage, but beware. Those who doubt their purpose will face their deepest fears. Kenji knelt beside the well, holding the flint steady. Haru sat beside him, a constant anchor in the shifting reality of the village. Kenji struck the flint once, twice, and on the third strike, a spark leapt into the well's darkness. A brilliant light surged forth, accompanied by a rush of memories. Kenji saw flashes of the villagers' final moments, their anguish, their regret. The images washed over him, but he remained focused, his mind rooted in the present. Haru barked sharply, snapping Kenji out of the visions. The light from the well flowed outward, enveloping the village. The villagers paused, their blank expressions softening as their forms grew brighter. Ayumi stepped forward, her figure now radiant. You've done it. The lantern's flame burns again, and we are free. Kenji stood, his expression serene. Will you pass on now? She nodded. Yes, but know this, wanderer. Your journey is far from over. You carry a light within you, one that will guide not only yourself, but many others. Double quotes. As the villagers dissolved into beams of moonlight, the lantern from the woods appeared, hovering silently before Kenji and Haru. Its flame flickered warmly, as if offering gratitude. Kenji bowed his head. Come, Haru. Our path continues. The pair turned and walked back into the forest, the lantern floating gently behind them, casting its light on the shadows of the unknown. As Kenji and Haru left the village, the lantern's glow followed them, its light casting long, shifting shadows on the forest floor. Though the night was silent, Kenji's mind churned with echoes of what he had seen. The visions from the well lingered, heavy and vivid, replaying the villagers' final moments. Their fear, their guilt, their desperate hope for salvation that came too late. Haru, sensing his master's unease, nudged Kenji's hand with his nose. Kenji smiled faintly, kneeling to ruffle the fur on Haru's neck. You always bring me back, don't you, old friend? He said softly. But as they walked, Kenji couldn't shake the question that the visions had stirred within him. What would I have done in their place? The forest path twisted, the lantern's glow revealing strange shapes in the mist. Kenji stopped when he felt the air shift, thickening with the same eerie weight he'd felt near the well. Haru growled low, his ears flat against his head. Do you sense it too, Haru? Kenji murmured, tightening his grip on his staff. A voice drifted from the shadows. Not the hollow tones of the lantern, but something deeper, resonating in Kenji's chest like a distant drumbeat. You've seen the regret, swordsman. Now face your own. The mist thickened, and Kenji felt himself pulled into a different place, a realm that seemed to exist outside of time. The forest vanished, replaced by a barren, moonlit plain. In the center of the expanse stood a figure. Kenji recognized him instantly, though it had been years since they last met. The figure was tall and imposing, clad in armor that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. His face was sharp and unyielding, his eyes cold with judgment. Kenji, the man said, his voice both familiar and piercing. Have you forgotten me? I could never forget, master. Kenji replied, his voice steady, but tinged with sorrow. The man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Then you remember your failure. The day you abandoned the code. The day you chose mercy over honor. Kenji's hand tightened around his staff, his knuckles white. I did what I believed was right. Taking a life that could be spared is no honor at all. Is that what you tell yourself? The figure spat. You disobeyed me. You left me to die. Kenji flinched as the memory surged forward. He saw the battlefield, the clash of steel, and the chaos of that fateful day. His master, gravely wounded, had ordered him to deliver the final strike to an enemy commander. But Kenji had hesitated. He had seen something in the enemy's eyes. Fear, desperation, humanity. He had spared the man and carried his dying master from the field instead. You betrayed the code. The figure snarled, his voice rising like thunder. You chose weakness. And because of you, I fell. Kenji's voice was quiet but firm. I chose compassion. And if that is weakness, then I will bear it. The figure raised his sword, its edge gleaming like a shard of the moon. Then bear it you shall, swordsman. Face me and prove your resolve. Kenji stood still, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his katana. Haru barked once, a sharp, clear sound that seemed to cut through the tension. Kenji exhaled slowly, centering himself. I will not fight you, master. You're but a shadow of the past, and I have made peace with my choice. The figure hesitated, his form flickering like a dying flame. Then why do you still carry the burden? Why does it haunt your steps? Kenji closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the truth. Because it is my burden to carry, but it does not define me. My path is not one of perfection. It is one of learning, of balance, of light and shadow. The figure lowered his sword, his expression softening. Then perhaps. You have surpassed me, Kenji. With that, the figure dissolved into the air, leaving Kenji and Haru alone in the moonlit plain. The mist thinned, and the forest returned, the lantern's light steady and warm. Kenji knelt beside Haru, resting a hand on his loyal companion's head. Thank you, Haru, he murmured, for always guiding me back to the present. The lantern pulls gently, as if in approval, and the two travelers resumed their journey. Though the weight in Kenji's heart remained, it felt lighter, tempered by the clarity of his purpose. For as long as there were shadows, there would be light, and Kenji and Haru would walk the path between them.